Chloe Aridgis, la escritora mexicano-estadounidense e hija del poeta Homero Aridgis, es autora de 3 novelas. Book of Clouds, la cual ganó en Francia el premio a la primera novela extranjera. La segunda, As Under, ambientada en la Galería Nacional de Londres, y Sea Monsters, la cual ha sido acreedora al premio Penn Faulkner de acción en 2020. Ha escrito para varias revistas de arte y fue curadora invitada de la exposición de Leonora Carrington en la Galería de Tate, Liverpool, en Inglaterra. Recibió una beca Guggenheim Fellowship en 2014 y el premio de literatura Eagle Center and Festival Hay en 2020. Es miembro fundadora de XR Writers Rebel, que aborda la emergencia climática y la extinción de las especies. Su colección de ensayos y relatos de ficción breve, Diálogo con un sonámbulo, historias, ensayos y una galería de retratos se publicó en 2021.
Hi, I'm Chloe Aridgis, a Mexican writer based in London, and I'm going to speak a bit about my 3 novels so far. And this is Ludwig, who is joining me tonight. Book of Clouds, my first novel, set in Berlin. It actually grew out of a short story. I first had in mind to write a collection of short stories, and in one of them a young woman goes out on a long walk, and her physical wandering is develops parallel to mental one, and she hits upon traces of the city's past. And of course, Berlin in particular has a very traumatized topography, and so she comes across all sorts of things. And I wanted the book, well, anyway, so it sort of, then it grew into a novel, and it became very clear to me that the city would be as much a protagonist as the narrator. And the movement in the novel, I realized, was very much from sort of mental image into some sort of more spectral reality. And there's 3 very important moments of disorientation in the book, which then lead to all sorts of discoveries. And my character works for an elderly historian and is quite solitary and introspective, and she projects her own crisis onto the city, which Berlin, more than almost any other city I've ever spent time in, is the ultimate city for projection. Everyone projects their own narrative onto it, and of course it has its own very powerful one. Yes, and Berlin was a wonderful place to work on my first novel, and for anyone to work on a work of fiction, because it gives you so much, hands you so much on a plate. It's a very mysterious city and very complex, all sorts of tensions, but it's also very quiet, so you can go home at the end of the day and just go over all your notes and thoughts and work in complete silence. And at the time when I was living there, wasn't terribly expensive, so there was also that freedom. So the first city, and Berlin was, I'd been spending time there since the 80s, but I'd been with my family in the 90s, and then when I finally moved there in the early 2000s after finishing my graduate work here in England. So it was a very, very idyllic place to write my first novel. So Book of Clouds is very much my hymn to Berlin, and also it's a way of really, over the course of the book, understanding my own relationship to the city, and and its own very phantasmagoric reality. So that's Book of Clouds. And Asunder, my second novel, grew out of many visits to the National Gallery, which is one of my favorite places in London. And similar to the way I started taking notes and envisioning my Berlin novel, I went around with my notebook and sort of did a sort of a topographic handling of the place, and searching for moments of tension within the museum. And so historically, the main one was the suffragettes' attacks on art in the years leading up to World War I. And and especially the Mary Richardson's attack on Velázquez's Rokeby Venus in 1914. So I'd always loved, well, museums, in particular painting. In another life, I would have loved to have been a painter. So this was my way of writing about painting and really spending many, many hours looking at paintings. And then I also became very interested in craquelure, which is the process over time in which oil paintings crack and the network of cracks that develops on the surface. So yeah, I was thinking a lot about sort of the continuum between containment and explosion, because my character is a female museum guard in Asunder, the second novel, and she sort of rebels against the passivity of her profession, spending all day standing or sitting in a room watching people come and go. And in the end, she rebels against it in different ways. So that's Asunder, and I was, the progression from, say, the narrator in Book of Clouds to Asunder is I wanted to give her more agency. And in both cases, I have quite an introverted female character who observes more than acts. But then as this second novel progresses, I did want her to take her life more into her own hands and stir things up herself rather than waiting for some peculiar, eccentric other character to come along and help her do that. And finally, Sea Monsters, my third novel, is set in Mexico in the late 80s, and I revisit my own adolescence in Mexico City. The novel centered around an episode that really did happen in my life when I was 16, which was I ran away to the beach, to Oaxaca, to the Pacific coast with the boy I liked, and my father came searching for me. So around that episode, I invented many scenes and characters and tried to evoke very much the Mexico of those times, of the late 80s, and also the subcultures, and a goth club my sister and I used to go to in Mexico City called Nueve, 9, because it was at number 9 Londres Street. And the book is, people often refer to it as a coming-of-age novel. I never really thought of it that way. I thought of it more as a novel of transformation, and which I guess for some people coming-of-age novels are, and they are to some extent. But I wanted to write more about a sort of metamorphosis rather than the passage from adolescence to adulthood. And yeah, I thought a lot about my own imaginary at the time and that of adolescence in general, when one's creating one's own imaginary and the things that feed into it. The literature one's reading, the music one listens to, the conversations one has, the characters who populate your world, and say the nightlife. Often, looking back, there's often secondary characters, people I didn't know very well, who provided quite a bit of inspiration because they remained enigmas. And of course, I wanted to also evoke Ludwig. I also wanted to evoke the atmosphere in Mexico City at the time. It was a few years after the earthquake of 1985, and there was a lot of solidarity between young people and social movements, and also new bands were forming, and so I wanted to capture all of that and have it in the background